Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. The attic smelled like dust and forgotten things. I'd been meaning to clear it out for years, but life had a way of piling up faster than junk. This time, I didn't have a choice. The ceiling in the kids' room had sprung a leak, and the plumber said the pipe ran through here. So, there I was, wrestling with old bins and boxes in a space barely tall enough to stand. The beam of my flashlight swept across the clutter. Baby clothes Anna insisted we keep, a yellowed wedding bouquet in a shadow box, and a dozen other relics of a life we built together. My knee nudged a stack of boxes, and something toppled to the floor with a dull thud. "Perfect," I muttered, crouching to pick it up. It was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, its surface smooth but darkened with age. No labels. No markings, just a simple clasp on the front. It felt heavy in my hands, and when I shook it, something inside slid with a soft rustle. I opened it. The first thing that caught my eye was a bundle of envelopes tied with a red ribbon, the kind you'd see in a romance movie. I almost laughed. Anna wasn't sentimental like that. She was practical, a little cold even. She loved clean lines and modern design. Not this. Curiosity won out. I tugged the ribbon loose and picked out the top letter. The paper was brittle, the handwriting on the front unfamiliar. To Anna. No return address. I unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was bold and slanted, the kind of script that looked like it belonged to someone with a lot of confidence or a lot of ego. Anna, I still remember the first time I saw you. That red dress, the way you smiled like you knew something the rest of the world didn't. You were trouble then, and you're trouble now. But God help me, I can't stay away. You said you needed space. Fine, but don't think for a second I'm letting you walk away. Not like this. Not without a fight. You know where to find me. You always do. I read it again, slower this time. Then again. Each word lodged itself deeper, scratching at something in my chest I couldn't name. My wife, my Anna, had kept this. Not just kept it, but tucked it away like a treasure, something worth preserving. David? Anna's voice called from downstairs. The plumber's here. Did you find the pipe? I froze, the letter still in my hand. The words seemed to hum in the silence of the attic. You're trouble now. I can't stay away. Yeah, I called back. My voice cracked. I swallowed hard and tried again. Just a minute. I shoved the letter back into the envelope and the envelope into the box, knotting the ribbon tight like I could erase the last 5 minutes. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it was the cold. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was probably just some old fling from before we met. Everyone has a past, right? But as I climbed down the ladder, that confidence felt thinner and thinner, like ice over deep water. Anna was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, her posture perfect as always. She turned and smiled, that same smile that always made me feel lucky to have her. I looked at her, really looked at her, and a single question took root in my mind, one that wouldn't let go. Who the hell was T? I couldn't sleep. Anna had drifted off hours ago, her breath soft and steady beside me. The house was dark, silent except for the hum of the fridge downstairs. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the words from the letter like a broken record. Trouble now. Can't stay away. Who was this guy? And why had she kept his letters? I got up quietly, slipping out of bed and into the hallway. The attic door loomed at the end like an unspoken challenge. I hesitated, glancing back toward the bedroom. Anna didn't stir. The ladder creaked as I climbed. My flashlight beam cut through the shadows, landing on the box where I'd left it earlier. It looked so ordinary, just another forgotten thing among countless others. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I carried it down to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and untied the ribbon again. The bundle of envelopes seemed thicker now, heavier with the weight of unanswered questions. I pulled out another letter. Anna, you keep saying you're done with me, but I know better. You always come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you will. I know why you left. It wasn't because you didn't love me. It was because you're scared. Scared of what we could be together. Scared of how much you feel. But you can't outrun this, Anna. You can't outrun me. I'll wait as long as it takes." My throat tightened as I read it. This wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper, something dangerous. The tone wasn't romantic. It was possessive, like she belonged to him, like he wouldn't let her go. I glanced at the stairs, half expecting Anna to appear, demanding to know what I was doing. But the house stayed quiet. I slid the letter back into its envelope and reached for another. The dates on the postmarks caught my eye this time. Each one neatly spaced, months apart. All addressed to our home. Our home. The letters weren't from before me. They were from after. My stomach churned. I yanked the next one open, scanning for answers. "Anna, I saw you today. You looked happy, but I know better. That's the thing about you. Your smiles never reach your eyes when you're lying. And you've been lying a lot lately, haven't you?" I almost said something, but I thought better of it. "I'll wait. I've always been patient with you, but don't make me wait too long." The words blurred as anger welled up in me. He'd seen her. Recently enough to write this. My mind raced. How much of this had been happening right under my nose? How many times had I sat at this very counter, clueless while some creep was watching my wife? I shoved the letters back into the box, my hands trembling. I needed to talk to Anna. No, confront her. But not yet. Not like this. I needed to be sure. I needed more. The last envelope caught my attention. It was thicker than the others, heavier. I picked it up and noticed something inside. A photograph. My chest tightened as I slid it out. The image was grainy, like it had been printed from an old camera, but the figures were unmistakable. Anna was there, her hand tucked into the crook of a man's arm. He was taller, broader, his face half turned toward her like he couldn't look anywhere else. There was something about the way he held her, like she wasn't just with him, she was his. The date scrawled on the back sent ice down my spine. October 14, 2018. That was 4 years into our marriage. I sat there, staring at the photo, my heart pounding. The man in the picture wasn't a stranger anymore. He wasn't just he had a face now. And that made it worse. He wasn't just a name in some letters. He was real. And he'd been in Anna's life far longer than I ever realized. The sound of movement upstairs broke my focus. Anna. I shoved the photo back into the envelope and the envelope into the box, my mind racing. The attic, the letters, the photo, they all screamed at me, demanded answers. But I couldn't ask. Not yet. Not until I knew the full story. I tied the ribbon around the bundle again, as tight as I could. Anna came downstairs a moment later, wrapped in her robe. Her eyes squinted against the light. "David, what are you doing?" "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just clearing some space in the attic." She glanced at the box, her expression unreadable. "At this hour?" "Yeah." Got into it and lost track of time. Her gaze lingered for a second too long, and I felt the weight of her scrutiny. But then she just nodded. "Well, come back to bed soon." "Okay." "Sure." I watched her turn and head back upstairs, the sound of her footsteps fading into the dark. I sat there for a long time, staring at the box. Whatever Anna was hiding, it wasn't just her secret anymore. It was ours now. And it wasn't going to stay buried. Not if I had anything to do with it. The box sat on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. I stared at it for hours. The letters and the photo burned into my mind. The words felt alive, crawling under my skin, whispering doubts I couldn't ignore. Anna was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She hadn't noticed me watching her, or if she had, she didn't show it. She looked normal, calm, like nothing was wrong. But that just made it worse. I couldn't take it anymore. "Anna," I said, stepping into the room. She looked up, her smile soft but cautious. "Hey, you've been quiet all morning. Everything okay?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I found something in the attic yesterday." Her head tilted, a small crease forming between her brows. "Oh, what?" "A box," I said, letting the word hang in the air. Her expression didn't change, but her hands froze, the magazine suddenly forgotten. "What kind of box?" "You tell me." "It had letters in it. From someone named T." Her face paled. Just a flicker, but enough. She recovered quickly, her features smoothing out into something neutral, controlled. "David, Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't lie to me, Anna." She closed the magazine, setting it aside. "I'm not lying. It's just complicated." "Complicated." I pushed off the doorframe, stepping closer. "That's what you're going with. These letters don't sound complicated. They sound possessive, obsessive. And that photo." I stopped, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. "You were with him while we were married." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "It wasn't what you think." "Then explain it to me." My voice rose, and I saw her flinch. "Because right now, I don't know what to think. I don't know who you are." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Anna never cried. "It's in the past. It's over. It has nothing to do with us." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You kept those letters, Anna. You hid them. That means it's not over." She stood, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Do you think I wanted to keep them? Do you think I wanted to deal with any of this?" "Then why did you?" I demanded. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I was trying to protect you." Her voice cracked, the words echoing in the room. I froze, stunned by the outburst. Anna rarely raised her voice. She was always composed, always in control. Seeing her like this was like staring at a stranger. "Protect me," I said, my voice low now. "From what?" Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. She sank back onto the couch, her gaze fixed on the floor. "From him. From Thomas." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Hearing it out loud made it real. "Who is he, Anna? And what does he want from you?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. "He's someone I knew a long time ago. Before you. We had a history." "That much I gathered," I said bitterly. "What kind of history?" Her eyes met mine, pleading. "It doesn't matter anymore. He's gone." "No, he's not," I said, pulling the photo from my pocket and tossing it onto the coffee table. "He was here. He's been watching you, watching us. So don't tell me it doesn't matter." She stared at the photo, her face ashen. "Where did you find this?" "In the box," I said, "along with the letters. The ones he sent to our house." "You think that doesn't matter?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, her silence more damning than anything she could have said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked again, softer this time. "Why did you let this guy hang over our marriage like a ghost?" "I thought it was over," she whispered. "I thought if I ignored him, he'd leave us alone." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Ignored him? Anna, he's not going anywhere. He's obsessed with you. He thinks you are still his." She flinched again, her hands tightening into fists. "I never wanted this. I never wanted any of this." "Then tell me the truth," I said, my voice firm. "All of it. No more hiding, no more secrets." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought she might. But then she shook her head, standing abruptly. "I can't. Anna, I can't, David." Her voice broke, and she turned away, heading for the stairs. "Not yet." I watched her go, my chest tight with anger and frustration. She was hiding something, something bigger than I'd imagined. And if she wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. As I stood there, staring at the photo on the table, one thing became painfully clear. Thomas wasn't just part of Anna's past. He was part of her present, and now he was part of mine too. Anna avoided me the next morning. She busied herself with the kids' lunches, her phone, the dishes, anything that kept her from meeting my gaze. The silence between us was loud, stretching with every passing minute. I needed answers, and if Anna wouldn't give them to me, I knew someone who might. Lisa McKinney, Anna's best friend, was a journalist with a knack for unearthing truths people didn't want found. She'd been part of our lives for years, attending barbecues, kids' birthdays, the works. She knew Anna better than anyone, and if there was one person who could fill in the blanks, it was her. I waited until Anna left for a client meeting, then grabbed my keys and headed for Lisa's place. She lived in a small house on the other side of town, her car already in the driveway when I pulled up. The sight of it steadied my nerves. Lisa had always been blunt, the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat anything. I needed that right now. She answered the door in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, a mug of coffee in one hand. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "David," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "This is a surprise." "I need to talk to you," I said. "It's about Anna." Her expression tightened, but she stepped aside, gesturing me in. "What's going on?" The smell of fresh coffee and vanilla candles filled the air as I followed her to the living room. She motioned for me to sit, then dropped onto the couch across from me. "All right, spill. What's this about?" I didn't waste time. "Do you know someone named Thomas? Thomas Evans?" Her reaction was instant. Her jaw clenched, and the mug trembled slightly in her hands. "Why are you asking about him?" "Because I found letters. Letters he sent to Anna. And a photo." I leaned forward, trying to read her face. "Who is he, Lisa?" She set the mug down carefully, her movements deliberate. "David, this isn't something I want to get involved in." "You're already involved," I said. "You've been Anna's best friend for years. If you know something about this guy, I need you to tell me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "And what did Anna say when you asked her?" "She won't tell me the whole story," I admitted. "She says it's in the past, that it's over. But it's not, is it?" Lisa hesitated, then sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Thomas is complicated. That's what Anna said." Well, she's not wrong. She crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "He's dangerous, David. The kind of man who doesn't take no for an answer." "Dangerous how?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Lisa looked away, her jaw tight. "Anna didn't tell you this, did she?" "Of course she didn't." She exhaled slowly, then met my gaze. "He wasn't just some boyfriend. He was controlling, manipulative. When they were together, he had her wrapped around his finger." "Did she love him?" Lisa's laugh was bitter. "She thought she did. But Thomas doesn't do love. Not the way normal people do. For him, it's about power. Control. He takes what he wants, and he doesn't care who he hurts." My hands curled into fists. "And now he's back." Lisa's expression darkened. "He never really left." "What do you mean?" "Anna tried to cut ties with him years ago," she said. "But Thomas, he doesn't let go. He's been keeping tabs on her, sending letters, making veiled threats. She thought she could handle it on her own. Clearly, she was wrong." I stared at her, my mind racing. Why didn't she tell me? "Because she was scared," Lisa said bluntly. "Scared of what he might do if she involved you. And maybe scared of what you'd think of her if you knew the whole story." The weight of her words settled on my chest. I thought about the letters, the photo, the look on Anna's face when I confronted her. She wasn't just hiding a mistake, she was hiding a threat. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice low. Lisa hesitated. "Honestly, you should leave it alone. Let Anna deal with it. The more you dig, the more you'll provoke him." "That's not an option," I said firmly. "This guy has been hanging over my family for years. I'm not going to sit back and wait for him to make the next move." She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. All right. If you're serious about this, then you need to be smart. Thomas isn't someone you can just confront. He's well-connected, shady. You need proof if you're going to do anything about him. Proof of what? Whatever he's into, she said. And trust me, he's into a lot. Illegal businesses, blackmail, you name it. If you want to take him down, you'll need leverage. Otherwise, he'll chew you up and spit you out. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I nodded. Where do I start? Lisa stood, grabbing a notebook from the coffee table. She scribbled something on a scrap of paper, then handed it to me. There's a place in Maple Hollow. Small town about an hour from here. Anna and Thomas used to spend time there. If you want answers, that's where you'll find them. I took the paper, folding it carefully. Thank you. She gave me a hard look. Don't thank me yet. You're poking a bear, David. Be careful. I left Lisa's house with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Thomas Evans wasn't just a ghost from Anna's past. He was a threat to our future. The drive to Maple Hollow was long and quiet, the kind of trip that gave you too much time to think. I replayed everything Lisa had said, every word of Anna's vague excuses, and the haunting lines from those letters. The pieces didn't fit, not yet, but I was determined to find the missing ones. Maple Hollow was the kind of town that looked like it had been plucked from a faded postcard. A single main street stretched out in front of me, lined with brick buildings, faded awnings, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't updated its prices since the 90s. A weathered sign reading "Welcome to Maple Hollow" swung lazily in the breeze. I parked in front of a diner called Hollow Grounds. The windows were fogged up, and the neon sign blinked sluggishly, as if it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to stay lit. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and grease, with a soundtrack of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. A waitress in her 50s with frizzy hair and a name tag that said Debbie glanced up as I walked in. Sit wherever you want, honorable. I slid into a booth by the window, my back to the wall. The vinyl seat groaned under my weight. Debbie appeared a moment later, balancing a pot of coffee and a notepad. What can I get ya? Just coffee, I said, forcing a polite smile. Black. She nodded, pouring the coffee with practiced efficiency. You're not from around here. No, just passing through. I hesitated, then decided to dive in. Actually, I'm looking for someone. Thomas Evans. You know him. The name hung in the air like a bad smell. Debbie froze, her eyes flicking up to mine. She set the pot down slowly, her cheerful expression dimming. Why are you looking for him? He's connected to someone I know, just trying to learn a little more about him. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced around the diner as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Look, I don't know much, but you're better off leaving that one alone. Tom Evans isn't exactly friendly. I've heard, I said, keeping my tone even. But I'd still like to know. Anything you can tell me would help. She sighed, leaning on the counter. Used to run a few businesses out of here. Shady ones. You know the type. Stuff that didn't make the books. He kept to himself mostly, but people who crossed him, well, let's just say they learned not to. What kind of businesses? I pressed. Debbie gave me a look that said I'd already asked too much. The kind you don't talk about in daylight. He's not around much these days, but he's still got eyes here. You ask the wrong questions, and they'll know. So unless you're looking for trouble, I'd let it go. Thanks for the advice, I said, though letting it go was the last thing on my mind. She straightened, picking up the coffee pot. Refill. No, I'm good. She walked off, and I sat there, turning her words over in my head. Thomas wasn't just a manipulative ex. He was a predator, someone who operated in shadows and used fear to keep people in line. I needed more than whispers and warnings. I needed facts. After I paid and left the diner, I wandered the main street, trying to get a feel for the place. It didn't take long to find someone who looked out of place, A man leaning against a lamppost, his leather jacket scuffed and his cigarette dangling from his lips. He watched me approach, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Not exactly." I stopped a few feet away. "I'm looking for information about Thomas Evans. Heard he used to be around here." The man smirked, taking a drag from his cigarette. "Tommy's got himself a fan club now." "Not exactly," I said. "I just need to know more about him." He flicked the cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his boot. "Yeah, well, knowing about Tommy ain't free. What's it worth to you?" I pulled out my wallet, peeling off a couple of 20s. He snatched them up, shoving them into his pocket without hesitation. "He's trouble," the man said, his tone growing serious. "Ran this place like his own personal kingdom for years. Drugs, loans, whatever could make him money. People owed him favors, and he collected however he wanted." "And Anna?" I asked, the name catching in my throat. What was her connection to him? His smirk returned, cruel and knowing. "Ah, so that's what this is about. Anna Palmer. Yeah, I remember her. Pretty little thing. Tommy was obsessed with her. Everyone knew it. Obsessed how? He didn't just want her. He wanted to own her." The man shrugged. "She tried to leave him. But Tommy doesn't lose. Not without a fight." The words chilled me. "And now?" "Now. I haven't seen him around in years, but don't think for a second he's forgotten her. Tommy never forgets." I stepped back, my stomach churning. "Thanks." "Yeah, sure," he said, lighting another cigarette. "But a word of advice. If you're smart, you'll stay out of it. Tommy's not a guy you want to piss off." I walked back to my car, his words echoing in my head. Anna hadn't just been involved with Thomas. She'd been trapped by him. And if what Lisa and this guy said was true, he wasn't done with her. Or me. As I pulled out of Maple Hollow, one thought kept me going. If Thomas Evans thought he could come after my family, he was wrong. Dead wrong. The drive home from Maple Hollow felt heavier, the air thick with questions that refused to settle. I couldn't shake the image of Anna and Thomas together, the way everyone described his grip on her, possessive, unrelenting. The thought that someone like him still had a hold over her, even from a distance, burned in my chest. When I got back to town, the house was quiet. Anna was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She glanced up when I walked in, her smile hesitant. "Hey," she said, "you were out for a while." "Yeah," I replied, hanging up my coat. "Had some errands to run." Her eyes lingered on me a moment too long, like she was trying to read my mood. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "Where are the kids?" "At Mom's for the weekend, remember?" I nodded, grateful for the timing. The space between us felt fragile, like it might shatter with the wrong word. I leaned against the counter, watching her work, the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board unnerving in its precision. "Have you ever thought about going back to Maple Hollow?" I asked casually. Her hands froze mid-chop. She didn't look up. "Why would I go back there?" "I don't know," I said. "Thought it might be nice to see the place. A little trip down memory lane." Her shoulders stiffened, and she set the knife down carefully. When she turned to face me, her expression was guarded. "What's this about, David?" "Just curious," I said, shrugging. "You never talk about your time there. Thought maybe there was something worth revisiting." "There's nothing worth revisiting," she said sharply. "That part of my life is over." Her reaction confirmed what I already knew. Maple Hollow wasn't just a place she'd lived. It was a scar she didn't want to touch. But scars have a way of reopening, whether you want them to or not. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "What are you so afraid of?" Her eyes flashed. "I'm not afraid." "Then why won't you tell me the truth?" The question came out harder than I intended, my frustration boiling over. "I went there, Anna. I talked to people. I know about Thomas, about what he was doing." Her face drained of color. "You had no right." No, right. I repeated, my voice rising. You've been keeping this from me for years, Hannah. Letters, photos. He's been watching us, hasn't he? How am I supposed to protect this family if you won't tell me what's going on? I didn't ask you to protect me, she snapped. No, I said, stepping closer. You didn't, but you should have. She looked away, her jaw tightening. You don't understand. Then make me understand, I pleaded. Who is he, Anna? What does he want? For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me. Her lips parted, her shoulders trembling with the weight of whatever she was holding back. But then she shook her head, turning back to the cutting board. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice flat. He's not part of our lives anymore. That's not good enough, I said. Not anymore. She didn't respond, her focus fixed on the vegetables. The sound of the knife slicing through them was the only answer I got. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Anna was beside me, her breathing slow and even, but I knew she wasn't asleep. Neither was I. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to reach for her, to demand the truth, but I knew it wouldn't work. Not yet. When the first hints of dawn crept through the curtains, I slipped out of bed and grabbed the box from its hiding place in the closet. I needed something more, something concrete, a clue that could force her to talk. I sifted through the letters again, the smell of old paper filling the air. At the bottom of the pile, I found something I'd missed before, a small folded piece of notebook paper tucked into the corner. I opened it carefully, my pulse quickening. Anna, if you don't come back, I'll make sure everyone knows. Your perfect little life won't look so perfect anymore. You know what I'm capable of. Don't make me prove it. The threat was clear, but what chilled me was the date scrawled in the corner. 2 months ago. I stared at the note, the words burning into my brain. Thomas wasn't just a shadow from the past. He was here, now, breathing down our necks. And Anna had known all along. My grip tightened on the paper as anger flared in my chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If Thomas thought he could control my wife, my family, he was wrong. Very wrong. I spent the next day researching every scrap of information I could find about Thomas Evans. If he wanted to be a ghost, he wasn't doing a great job. His name surfaced in local news articles, small blurbs about his business ventures in Maple Hollow. They were vague, almost sanitized, but the undertones were clear. Loan sharking, gambling, and a few whispers of extortion. Nothing that stuck, though. The man was slippery. But I found something more. A business address. It was listed under an LLC with some generic name, Pine Ridge Holdings. My gut told me it wasn't a coincidence. I waited until evening, when Anna was out with the kids. She'd taken them to her mother's place, a last-minute visit that gave me the perfect window. I grabbed the address, my jacket, and the photograph from the box. If Thomas was still in town, I needed to see him face to face. I wasn't going to let him haunt my family any longer. The building was on the edge of an industrial park, its facade a dull gray with no sign of life. A single light flickered above the door, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. My car felt like a beacon under the dim glow of the streetlights, but I killed the engine and stepped out anyway, the photograph tucked into my pocket like a talisman. Inside, the air smelled of stale cigarettes and dust. The space was dimly lit, cluttered with mismatched furniture and filing cabinets that looked like they'd been salvaged from a junkyard. A man sat behind the front desk, flipping through a magazine. His bulk filled the chair, and his eyes were sharp when they flicked up to meet mine. "Help you?" he asked, his tone flat. "I'm here to see Thomas Evans." His brow furrowed. "Got an appointment?" "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm pretty sure he'll want to see me." The man snorted, leaning back in his chair. "That's so. And who are you?" "David Palmer." Something flickered in his eyes, a brief flash of recognition. He stood, the chair groaning under his weight. "Wait here." He disappeared down a hallway, leaving me alone in the silence. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, the tension in my chest winding tighter with every second. When he returned, his face was blank, his head jerking toward the hall. "Go ahead." "End of the hall. Last door on the left." I nodded, walking past him. My footsteps echoed on the scuffed linoleum floor, the weight of what I was about to do sinking in with every step. Thomas's office was surprisingly neat. The desk was clean, the papers stacked in perfect order. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the room, and behind the desk sat the man himself. He was exactly as I'd pictured him, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked up as I entered, leaning back in his chair like he'd been expecting me. "Well," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "If it isn't the husband." I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding in my ears. "Thomas." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." "I'll stand." His smile widened, but it was more predatory than friendly. "Suit yourself. So, what can I do for you, David? Or should I call you Mr. Palmer? You're here about Anna, aren't you?" I pulled the photograph from my pocket and tossed it onto the desk. "You've been watching her." He picked up the photo, studying it with a faint smirk. "You found my little keepsake. Thought Anna would have burned it by now." "She didn't," I said, my voice hard. "But she's not yours anymore. Whatever you're trying to do, it ends now." He set the photo down, folding his hands on the desk. "I don't think you understand how this works. Anna and I, we have history. You can't just erase that. She's my wife. And yet, here you are," he said, his tone smug, "digging through her past. Doesn't sound like you're too confident in your marriage." "Stay away from her," I said, stepping closer. "I mean it." He tilted his head, his expression calculating. "Or what?" The challenge in his voice sent a wave of anger through me. "Or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. I've been digging, Thomas. You've got plenty of skeletons in your closet. It won't take much to bring them into the light." He laughed, low and quiet. "You think I'm scared of you? I've dealt with worse than some angry husband." "This isn't a game," I said through clenched teeth. "You don't get to mess with my family," and walk away. His smile faded, and his eyes hardened. "You're in over your head, David. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Maybe not," I said, holding his gaze. "But I'm not going anywhere. And if you come near Anna or my kids again, I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension so thick, it was hard to breathe. Then Thomas leaned back in his chair, his smile returning. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't mean much when you're up against someone like me." He stood, his presence filling the room. "You should think long and hard about your next move. You might not like where it leads." I didn't flinch. "Neither will you." I turned and walked out before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the car, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't backing down. Thomas Evans wasn't going to disappear quietly, but neither was I. I barely slept that night. Thomas's words echoed in my head, each one digging deeper into my thoughts. He wasn't bluffing. I could see it in his eyes. He was confident, dangerous, and utterly convinced of his hold over Anna, and that terrified me. When I woke the next morning, Anna was already up. The scent of coffee filled the air, but the usual warmth of our kitchen felt cold. She stood at the counter, staring into her mug like it held answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. "We need to talk." She didn't look at me. "About what?" "About Thomas. About why he still thinks he has a claim on you." Her shoulders stiffened, and she set the mug down carefully, like she was afraid it might shatter. "I told you, it's over." "No, it's not," I said, stepping closer. "I met him last night." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and anger. "You what?" I went to see him, I said, keeping my voice calm. I needed to understand what we're dealing with. You had no right, she hissed, her voice low but sharp. Do you have any idea what you've done? I did what I had to, I said. You won't tell me the truth, so I had to find it myself. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. You don't know what he's capable of, David. You've just made everything worse. Then tell me, I said, my voice rising. Tell me what he's capable of. Tell me why you've been hiding this from me. She turned away, her head bowed. You don't understand. You keep saying that, I said, frustration boiling over. So make me understand, Anna. Tell me why Thomas thinks he can control you. Tell me why he's still in our lives. She didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound breaking the tension like a gunshot. Damn it, Anna, I'm your husband. You can't keep shutting me out. She flinched, her eyes glistening as she finally looked at me. He has something on me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. When we were together, I got involved in some things. Things I didn't fully understand at the time. Like what? Like his business, she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. I thought it was harmless. Just helping him with paperwork, running errands. But it wasn't. It was illegal, David. All of it. And when I tried to leave, he made sure I couldn't. I stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. What does he have on you? Evidence, she said quietly. Emails, documents. Things that make it look like I was more involved than I actually was. He said if I ever tried to go to the police, he'd use them to ruin me. I exhaled slowly, the pieces falling into place. So you stayed quiet. You let him control you. Her voice broke. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice, I said, the anger creeping back into my tone. You could have told me. We could have dealt with this together. I didn't want to drag you into it, she said. I didn't want you or the kids to get hurt. I shook my head, pacing the kitchen. And now? What does he want now? I don't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been quiet for years, but then the letters started coming again. The threats. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. Well, he hasn't, I said. And now we're both in his crosshairs. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm sorry, David. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could protect you. I took a deep breath, the anger giving way to something colder, sharper. We need to deal with this. For good. How? She asked, her voice trembling. He's untouchable. No one's untouchable, I said, the resolve hardening in my chest. We just need to find the right leverage. The rest of the day, I worked in secret. Anna didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't tell her. I started with the documents I'd found in the box, the letters, the photo, and the note with its chilling ultimatum. Then I started digging. I tracked down old business licenses, tax records, anything tied to Thomas and Pine Ridge Holdings. It didn't take long to find discrepancies, gaps in his records, unaccounted for assets. There was something there, something he'd been hiding. But the real breakthrough came when I checked Anna's email account. She'd given me the password years ago, and I doubted she'd changed it. Sure enough, there it was, an email from Thomas, buried in her archives. The subject line read simply, "Our agreement." The email was brief, but the attachment said everything I needed to know. It was a scanned contract, signed by both Anna and Thomas, outlining her role in his company. It painted her as a key player, someone who'd knowingly facilitated his illegal activities. But there was something else, a line at the bottom, written in smaller print, a clause stating that the agreement was null and void if evidence emerged that Anna had been coerced or threatened. It was a tiny crack in his armor, but it was something. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Thomas had been careful, but he'd left a thread. And now I had a way to pull it. When I got home that night, Anna was waiting for me in the living room. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. "Did you find anything?" she asked quietly. I held up the printed email, my jaw set. "I found everything." Her eyes widened as she read the document, her hands trembling. "What does this mean?" "It means we can fight back," I said. "But we'll need help." "Help from who?" I hesitated, then pulled out my phone. Lisa. Lisa arrived at our house just after 10 that night, her expression sharp and focused, as if she already knew the weight of the conversation. She carried her leather bag slung over one shoulder, a notebook tucked under her arm. She stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes scanning the room. "All right," she said, dropping her bag onto the coffee table. "Tell me everything." Anna hesitated, perched on the edge of the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I sat beside her, the printout of the email resting between us like a fragile truce. Lisa's gaze flicked between us, her brow furrowing. "This is about Thomas, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And we're going to stop him." Lisa snorted, leaning back in the armchair. "That's ambitious. Do you have a plan, or is this more of a blind hope situation?" "We have this," I said, handing her the email. "It's a contract between Anna and Thomas. He's been using it to blackmail her." Lisa's eyes skimmed the document, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Typical Thomas. He leaves just enough rope to hang himself, but not without a fight. This clause about coercion, it's your angle, isn't it?" I nodded. "If we can prove he threatened Anna or forced her into anything, the contract is void. But we'll need evidence." "And by we, you mean me," Lisa said, arching an eyebrow. "You're the journalist," I said. "If anyone can dig up dirt on him, it's you." Lisa tapped the edge of the contract against her palm, her eyes narrowing in thought. "I can look into it. But you need to understand, Thomas isn't just some two-bit thug. He's got connections, money, influence, people who owe him favors. If we're going after him, we have to be airtight. One misstep, and he'll bury us." Anna shifted uncomfortably beside me. I didn't want this. Any of it. Lisa's gaze softened slightly, but her tone stayed firm. "No one wants this, Anna. But it's here now, and if we don't deal with it, he'll never stop." "Do you think you can find anything?" I asked. Lisa smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came with sharp teeth. "Oh, I can find something. The real question is, what are you willing to do once I do?" The next few days blurred into a haze of tension and waiting. Lisa worked quietly but methodically, pulling threads from her network of contacts, chasing down leads. Anna grew more withdrawn, retreating into herself as the weight of her past pressed harder. I split my time between my job and the growing stack of papers and files Lisa sent me, trying to piece together a picture of Thomas's empire. Then Lisa called. "I've got something," she said, her voice clipped with urgency. "Meet me at my place. Bring Anna." Lisa's living room was cluttered with papers and coffee cups, her laptop open on the table. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, pointing to a stack of documents as soon as we sat down. "These," she said, "are financial records. They're tied to one of Thomas's shell companies. Look at the dates." Anna leaned forward, her brow furrowing as she scanned the pages. "These are from when I was with him." "Exactly," Lisa said. "And they show a lot of money moving around. Too much for the kind of business he claims to run." "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means he's been laundering money through these companies for years," Lisa said. "And Anna's name is on some of the transactions." Anna froze, her face pale. "What? No, I never." "Relax," Lisa said, holding up a hand. "I'm not saying you were involved. I'm saying he used your name. Probably forged your signature on a few things. It's sloppy, and it's illegal." I clenched my fists. "Can we use this?" "Not directly," Lisa said, "but it's leverage. If we can link this to his other activities, Loan sharking, extortion, whatever. We can build a case. Enough to put him in a corner. Anna's voice was barely a whisper. And if he finds out? Lisa's expression hardened. Then we make sure we're ready for him. That night, back at home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing a dangerous game. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Thomas had built his life on a house of cards. But he wasn't the type to let it fall quietly. Anna sat on the couch, staring at the floor. I joined her, the silence between us heavy. "We're going to get through this," I said, placing a hand on hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at me either. "I'm scared, David." "I know," I said, "but we've got Lisa, and we've got evidence. He won't get away with this." She nodded slowly, but her expression didn't change. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that had been building for years. I squeezed her hand. "We're in this together." Her lips quivered, and for the first time in days, she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her tightly. For that moment, at least it felt like we were on the same side. But as the clock ticked past midnight, a new thought crept into my mind. Lisa had said we needed to be airtight. That one misstep could cost us everything. What if that misstep was already behind us? 2 days later, Thomas made his move. It happened just as Anna was getting ready to leave for a meeting. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, when the doorbell rang. Anna froze mid-step, her gaze snapping to the door like it was a snake ready to strike. "I'll get it," I said, setting my mug down. "No," Anna said quickly, her voice tight. "It's probably just a package." I frowned, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Ignoring her, I crossed the room and opened the door. Thomas stood there, his smile sharp and cold. He looked just as smug as he had in his office, but this time, he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, their expressions blank but their postures tense, like coiled springs. "David," Thomas said smoothly, his voice like poisoned honey. "Lovely to see you again." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to keep Anna from hearing. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Just a friendly visit," he said, spreading his arms as if to show he meant no harm. "Thought it was time we had a little chat." "We have nothing to talk about." He chuckled, shaking his head. "See, that's where you're wrong. You've been poking around in places you shouldn't, and I don't take kindly to that." I crossed my arms, refusing to back down. "What do you want, Thomas?" His smile faded, replaced by a hard, predatory stare. "I want you to stop. Stop digging, stop playing detective, stop whatever game you think you're playing. Walk away now, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let this little family of yours stay intact." My stomach churned, but I didn't flinch. "And if I don't?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low growl. "If you don't, I'll ruin you. I'll ruin Anna. I'll make sure your kids grow up knowing exactly who their parents really are." "You think I'm scared of you," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "You should be," he said, straightening. "You're in over your head, David. You've got no idea what I'm capable of." I stared at him, my mind racing. He was bluffing. He had to be. But there was a part of me, a small, gnawing part, that couldn't dismiss the threat. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Anna, the kids, our entire life. Thomas turned to leave, but paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You've got until the end of the week to drop this. After that, I won't be so polite." The door to a sleek black car opened, and he slid inside. His goons followed, and a moment later, the car pulled away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, my pulse roaring in my ears. Inside, Anna was waiting in the hallway, her face pale. What did he say? I hesitated, debating whether to shield her from the full weight of Thomas's threat, but the look in her eyes told me she already knew. "He wants us to stop," I said finally. "He said if we don't, he'll come after us." Her breath hitched, and she leaned against the wall. "David, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." I moved to her, placing my hands on her shoulders. "We're not giving in. We have Lisa, we have evidence. We can take him down." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. He's dangerous, David. He'll hurt us. He'll hurt you." "I'm not afraid of him," I said, though the weight of his threat still pressed on my chest. "We're going to end this, Anna. Together." She nodded reluctantly, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. That night, I called Lisa. Thomas showed up. "What?" she said sharply. "At your house." "Yeah, he's trying to scare us off. He gave me an ultimatum. Drop everything by the end of the week, or he'll ruin us." Lisa swore under her breath. "This is escalating faster than I thought. We need to move. I found something else today. Something big." "What is it?" "There's a property in his name, just outside of Maple Hollow," she said. "It's not on any of his business records, but it's been active. Deliveries, vehicles coming and going. I think it's a front." "A front for what?" "Something illegal," she said. "Drugs, weapons, maybe worse. If we can link it to him, we'll have enough to take to the police." My stomach tightened. "What do you need from me?" "Proof," she said. "We need something concrete. A photo, a recording. Anything that ties him to the property. And we need it fast." I hesitated. "You're asking me to go there." "I'm asking you to finish this," she said. "But only if you're sure, if you get caught." "I won't," I said, cutting her off. "Send me the address." Lisa sighed. "Be careful, David. Thomas isn't the kind of man who forgives mistakes." "I know," I said, ending the call. As I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of what I was about to do settled over me. Thomas had drawn his line in the sand, and now it was my turn to cross it. The air in the house felt suffocating, thick with everything Anna and I weren't saying to each other. I couldn't let it stay that way, not with what I was about to do. If I was going to face Thomas head-on, I needed to know everything, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. She was sitting on the couch when I found her, staring blankly at the muted television. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. Her eyes flicked to me, guarded. "About what?" "About Thomas. About all of it." I stepped closer, my voice firm but calm. "No more secrets, Anna. I need to know the truth." She looked away, her jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse, like she had so many times before. But then she sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of whatever she'd been holding back. "Okay," she said quietly. "Ask me." I sat across from her, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees. "How did it start?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We met when I was fresh out of college. I was working at a design firm. And he was, well, you've seen what he's like. Charismatic. Confident. He made me feel important, like I was the only thing that mattered." She paused, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater. "At first, it was exciting. He took me to fancy dinners, showed me off to his friends. But then, he started to change. He got possessive, controlling. He wanted to know where I was, who I was with. And when I tried to pull away, he wouldn't let me." My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean?" "He'd threaten me," she said, her voice trembling. "Not physically, at least, not at first. He'd say things like, 'You'll never make it without me,' or 'I'll ruin you if you leave.' I was stupid. I stayed longer than I should have." "And the business?" I asked. "How did you get involved in that?" She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. "He asked me to help him with some paperwork. I didn't think anything of it, just signing forms, making phone calls. It wasn't until later that I realized what I'd been doing. He'd used me as a front for his laundering. My name was on everything." "Did you confront him?" I asked. "I tried," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He just laughed. Told me I was in it as deep as he was, and if I tried to leave, he'd make sure the police thought I was the mastermind. The tears spilled over now, streaking down her cheeks. When I finally worked up the courage to leave, I thought I was free. But he kept showing up. Letters, phone calls, threats. Even after I met you, he wouldn't let go. I thought if I ignored him, he'd move on. But he didn't, I said, my jaw tight. She shook her head. No. And now he's dragged you into it. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. The pieces were falling into place, each one sharper than the last. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her eyes met mine, filled with guilt. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to see me the way I see myself, as a coward who let him control me for so long. You're not a coward, I said firmly. You made mistakes, Anna. Everyone does. But this, what he's doing, it's not your fault. She stared at me, her lip trembling. What are we going to do? I leaned forward, taking her hands in mine. We're going to end this. Lisa found something, proof that could bring him down. But it's risky. I'm going to that property she found. Her grip tightened on my hands. No, David, you can't. If Thomas catches you, I'll be careful, I said, cutting her off. But this is the only way. We can't live like this anymore. I won't let him control us. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. I can't lose you. You won't, I said, my voice steady. But I need you to trust me. She nodded reluctantly, her hands trembling in mine. I trust you. Just come back to me. I will, I promised, even as a knot of doubt twisted in my chest. That night, as Anna slept fitfully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Thomas, his smug smile, the threats he'd made. I thought about Anna, about everything she'd endured, and the life we'd built together despite the shadows of her past. Tomorrow, I would face him, and one way or another, this would end. The drive to the property Lisa had uncovered felt like the longest of my life. The address she'd given me led to a remote wooded area on the outskirts of Maple Hollow. The gravel road wound through thick trees, the canopy above blotting out most of the daylight. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as I approached the clearing. The building came into view, a low, unassuming warehouse with corrugated metal siding and a single rusted door. It was surrounded by nothing but forest, secluded enough to hide whatever Thomas didn't want found. A few nondescript vehicles were parked outside, their windows tinted. I parked a good distance away and slipped out of the car, crouching low as I moved closer. The wind rustled through the trees, masking the crunch of gravel under my boots. My heart pounded, but I pushed forward, every step a reminder of what was at stake. When I reached the edge of the property, I ducked behind a stack of discarded pallets, scanning the area. The building looked deserted, but the faint hum of machinery inside told me otherwise. I pulled out my phone, snapping pictures of the vehicles and the warehouse. Lisa had been clear, document everything. I moved closer, sticking to the shadows. A side door was slightly ajar, and I slipped inside, holding my breath. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, the faint clatter of equipment echoing in the space. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I took in the scene. Rows of crates lined the walls, each marked with cryptic labels, numbers and letters that meant nothing to me but screamed illicit. A few men moved through the space, clipboard in hand, their voices low as they spoke in hurried tones. I kept to the edges, careful to stay out of sight. I pulled out my phone again, snapping photos of the crates and the men. My heart raced as I recorded a short video, capturing their conversation about shipments and deadlines. This was it, proof that Thomas' operation was bigger than I'd imagined. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Close. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping dangerously close to where I crouched. I ducked behind a crate, holding my breath as the footsteps grew louder. Thought I heard something, a man said, his voice gruff. Probably a raccoon. Another replied. Hurry up. Thomas doesn't like delays. The footsteps faded, and I let out a slow, shaky breath. I needed to get out of here, fast. I retraced my steps, slipping back toward the side door. The adrenaline coursing through me made every second stretch, but I didn't stop until I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I was halfway to my car when I heard it, an engine roaring to life. I glanced over my shoulder and saw headlights cutting through the darkness, moving toward the warehouse. I ducked behind a tree, my breath catching in my throat. The car stopped, and the door opened. Thomas stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized his silhouette, broad-shouldered, confident, and infuriatingly smug. He spoke to one of the men waiting by the entrance, his voice too low to hear. But the way the man nodded, then hurried inside, told me all I needed to know. Thomas was here to oversee something. Something big. I waited, my back pressed against the tree, until the headlights disappeared and the night fell silent again. Then I made my move, slipping back into my car and driving away as quickly and quietly as I could. When I reached Lisa's house, I practically ran to her door, the phone clutched tightly in my hand. She opened it, her expression tense. You get it? She asked. I nodded, stepping inside. Everything. Photos, video, conversations. It's all here. Lisa took the phone, scrolling through the images and video, her brow furrowed as she watched, her lips pressing into a thin line. This is good, really good. Good enough to take to the police? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. It's a start, but we'll need to be strategic. If we tip them off too soon, they'll scatter, and Thomas will disappear. We need to make sure this sticks. Then what's the next step? I asked. She set the phone down, her gaze sharp. We leak this to the right people. Someone who can put pressure on the police to act. If we make enough noise, Thomas won't be able to weasel his way out. Anna's voice cut through the room, startling us both. And what happens to us in the meantime? I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Thomas will come after us, she said. You know he will. He's already coming after us, I said. But this time, we're not running. We're fighting back. Anna shook her head, her voice trembling. You don't know him like I do. He won't stop, David. Not until he gets what he wants. And what does he want? Lisa asked, her tone sharp. Anna's gaze dropped, her shoulders sagging. Control. He doesn't care about the business or the money. He just wants to win. Well, Lisa said, her voice cold, it's time we show him he's already lost. I reached for Anna's hand, gripping it tightly. We're going to end this. Together. Her fingers trembled in mine, but she nodded, a flicker of determination breaking through the fear. Together. The plan came together in whispers and tense nods over Lisa's dining room table. Papers and printouts covered every inch of the surface, illuminated by a single desk lamp. It felt like we were preparing for war. And maybe we were. Thomas Evans was the enemy, and this was the only way to take him down. Lisa outlined the details, her voice steady despite the tension hanging in the air. We'll use the property. Leak the evidence anonymously to the police tip line, but just enough to get their attention. They'll raid the place, and when they do, we'll make sure Thomas is there. Anna sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. How do you make sure he's there? Lisa looked at me. That's where you come in. What? Anna's head snapped up, her voice sharp. No, absolutely not. He's done enough. Lisa ignored her, addressing me directly. You're the only one he'll listen to right now. You've already got his attention. If you call him, make him think you're ready to negotiate. Maybe give him something to believe you're scared. He'll show. I'm not scared of him, I said firmly, but I knew what she meant. And if he doesn't? He will, Lisa said with conviction. Thomas doesn't let go of control. He won't pass up a chance to keep his claws in you. Anna's hand gripped my arm. David, this is too dangerous. He'll know it's a setup. Not if we're smart about it, Lisa said. The police won't know you're involved. The raid will seem unrelated. Thomas will think it's bad luck, until it's too late. Anna shook her head, her voice trembling. And what if it's not too late? What if he figures it out? What if he... I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. Anna, we can't keep running. We've tried that, and it hasn't worked. If we don't stop him now, he'll never stop. She stared at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I just don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, taking her hand in mine. But I have to do this. For us. For the kids. She nodded reluctantly, her grip tightening. The call to Thomas was short and to the point. I kept my voice measured, lacing it with just enough tension to make it believable. Thomas, I said when he picked up. David. His tone was smug, as if he'd already won. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. You made your point, I said, letting a hint of defeat creep into my words. I just want this to end. What do you want? There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Smart man. Let's talk. I glanced at Lisa, who gave me a nod. The warehouse, I said. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. Bold choice, he said. What makes you think I'll show? You want control, don't you? I shot back. This is your chance to prove you still have it. Another pause. Then, all right, David. Tomorrow night. But just so we're clear, if this is a trick, you'll regret it. The line went dead. The hours leading up to the meeting crawled by. Anna hovered near me, her nerves visible in every movement. Lisa stayed calm, methodical, checking and rechecking her contacts to make sure the police were prepared. I tried to focus, but the weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my chest. When the time came, I drove to the warehouse alone. The air was thick with tension as I parked a safe distance away and slipped toward the agreed meeting spot. I waited in the shadows, the cool night air biting at my skin. At 9:05, headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness as Thomas's sleek black car pulled up. He stepped out, alone, his movements confident, predatory. He looked around, his eyes scanning the area before settling on me. David, he called, his voice carrying in the quiet. Let's talk. I stepped forward, keeping my movements measured. You said you wanted control. I'm here to give it to you. Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Smart move. I knew you'd come around. The moment stretched, taut, and suffocating. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of sirens. Thomas froze, his smile fading as the wail grew louder, closer. His eyes flicked to me, narrowing. You bastard, he hissed. I shrugged, feigning indifference. Bad luck, Thomas. He reached for something in his jacket, a phone, a weapon. I couldn't tell, but the blue and red lights of approaching police cars swept over us before he could act. Doors slammed, voices shouted, and within seconds, officers surrounded him, their weapons drawn. Thomas raised his hand slowly, his jaw clenched. You'll regret this, he said, his gaze locking on mine. I doubt it, I said, stepping back as the officers moved in. The raid unfolded in a blur. Officers swarmed the warehouse, securing the crates and apprehending Thomas's men. I stayed in the background, watching as the life Thomas had built crumbled around him. When it was over, Lisa called me. He's done, she said, her voice triumphant. They'd got him on trafficking, laundering, and extortion. He won't be able to worm his way out of this. I ended the call and drove home, the weight in my chest finally lifting. Anna was waiting for me when I walked through the door, her expression anxious. It's over, I said, pulling her into my arms. He's done. She clung to me, her tears soaking into my shirt. Thank you, she whispered, for fighting for us. I held her tightly, the relief washing over me. For the first time in years, it felt like we could finally breathe. The trial was short. Thomas Evans, once untouchable, now sat shackled and silent in the courtroom. The evidence Lisa uncovered, combined with the police raid and the financial records we'd unearthed, painted a picture too damning to ignore. The prosecutor called him a master manipulator, a man who built an empire on fear and control. His lawyers tried to spin it, claiming coerced witnesses and faulty investigations, but the jury didn't buy it. Thomas was sentenced to 25 years without parole. He glared at me as they let him out, his lips curling into a faint smile, like he still had some secret left to play. But I didn't care anymore. His power over us was broken, and that knowledge was enough. Anna and I didn't talk much on the ride home from the sentencing. The weight of everything that had happened still lingered, but it felt different now. Less like a storm and more like a calm after. When we pulled into the driveway, she reached over and touched my hand. "It's really over," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, it is." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. It wasn't forced or tinged with guilt. It was real. And it reminded me of the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were ours. We went to therapy together, peeling back the layers of anger and fear we both carried for too long. Anna confessed everything, things I hadn't even suspected, and I let myself feel the hurt, the betrayal. But I didn't let it consume me. She'd spent so many years carrying shame for mistakes she couldn't undo, and I wasn't about to add to that burden. For my part, I admitted my failures too. I'd been so focused on the illusion of a perfect life that I ignored the cracks beneath the surface. I hadn't asked the questions I should have. I hadn't seen Anna's pain when it was right in front of me. Slowly, we rebuilt. It wasn't the same house we'd started with, but maybe that was a good thing. This one was stronger, built on honesty instead of perfection. One evening, a few months after the trial, Anna and I were sitting on the porch, watching the kids play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I still think about him sometimes," she admitted. "About what he did, about who I was back then." I didn't flinch. We'd promised to be honest, even when it was hard. "That's okay," I said. "He's part of your story, but he doesn't define you." She looked up at me, her eyes soft. "And us. He doesn't define us either," I said. "We do that." Her smile was small but genuine. I liked the sound of that. Lisa became a fixture in our lives after everything settled. She still teased me about being too noble for my own good, but her sharp humor had a warmth to it now. She and Anna grew closer, their bond strengthened by the shared scars of dealing with Thomas. One afternoon, she came over with a printed article from a national outlet. "You made the big leagues," she said, tossing it onto the table. The headline read, "Inside the Fall of Thomas Evans, a criminal empire brought down by family courage." Anna read the article in silence, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. When she finished, she folded it neatly and looked at me. "You did this," she said. "We did this," I corrected. Life didn't go back to normal. It grew into something better. I started noticing the small things again. The way Anna laughed when the kids said something silly, the way the sunlight hit her hair in the mornings, the way her hand felt in mine. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Her pieces weren't perfect, but they were beautiful, raw, and full of life, like she was finally letting herself breathe. The kids, blissfully unaware of most of the turmoil, flourished. They filled the house with laughter and noise, grounding us in the present when the past felt too heavy. One night, as I tucked them into bed, my daughter asked, "Are you and Mommy happy?" I paused, looking at her little face, so open and curious. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "We're happy." On the 1-year anniversary of the raid, Anna and I took the kids on a trip to the coast. Standing on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, the wind tugging at our hair, she slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," she said, her voice barely audible over the crash of the waves. "On us." I turned to her, my chest tightening. "We don't give up, Anna. Not on each other." She leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The shadows of the past were still there, faint and far away, but they didn't define us anymore. We'd walked through the fire together, and on the other side, we'd found something stronger, something real. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.